The stagecoach rattled into Monticello, Utah Territory, on a scorching July afternoon in 1878, carrying Penelope James and everything she owned crammed into two leather trunks, her heart pounding with equal parts dread and resignation as she contemplated the marriage contract that had brought her west to a man she had never met. Penelope pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, watching the small frontier town materialize through the heat shimmer. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their false fronts promising more grandeur than they delivered. Men in dusty work clothes loitered outside the saloon, and a few women in simple calico dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks. This was to be her new home, her prison, she thought bitterly. The arrangement had been made by her father before his death 6 months prior. Samuel James had been a Boston merchant who had fallen on hard times, gambling away what little remained of the family fortune. In a desperate attempt to secure his daughter's future, he had answered an advertisement from a Utah rancher seeking a wife. The contract had been signed, money exchanged, and Penelope's fate sealed before consumption finally claimed her father's life. At 22 years old, Penelope had watched her mother waste away in a loveless marriage, had seen how matrimony transformed a vibrant young woman into a hollow shell who existed only to serve her husband's needs and bear his disappointments. Her mother had died when Penelope was 17, and in those final days, she had grasped her daughter's hand with surprising strength. "Marriage is a cage, my darling," her mother had whispered. "Once you enter, the door locks behind you and you spend your days rattling the bars." Those words had haunted Penelope ever since. She had resisted marriage, despite her father's increasing pressure. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, of maintaining her independence, of making her own choices. But her father's debts and death had stolen those dreams, replacing them with a one-way ticket to Utah Territory and a husband whose name she barely knew. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the general store, and the driver called out, "Monticello, end of the line." Penelope gathered her carpetbag and stepped down into the dusty street, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The heat was oppressive, nothing like the mild summers of Boston. Sweat already dampened her high-necked traveling dress, and she resisted the urge to loosen her collar. "Miss James." A deep voice spoke from behind her. Penelope turned and found herself looking up at a tall man in worn denim trousers and a sun-faded shirt. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, with strong features and eyes the color of summer sky. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with an earnest expression that caught her off guard. "I am Penelope James," she confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am Blake Bennett. I expect you are here for my brother Thomas." He shifted his weight, seeming uncomfortable. "I am afraid there has been a complication." Penelope's stomach dropped. "A complication? Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private." Blake gestured toward a small restaurant across the street. "Have you eaten? The stage journey from Salt Lake is long." "I am not hungry, Mr. Bennett. Please tell me what has happened." Blake's expression grew pained. "My brother Thomas passed away 3 weeks ago. A riding accident. His horse spooked during a thunderstorm, threw him. He hit his head on a rock. The doctor said he never regained consciousness." The words hung in the desert air between them. Penelope struggled to process this information. Relief warred with shock and an unexpected stab of grief for a man she had never known. "I see. Then I suppose I should arrange passage back to Boston." "That is certainly your right," Blake said carefully, "but I would like to propose an alternative if you would hear me out." "Could we at least sit down? You have had a long journey, and this news must be shocking." Against her better judgment, Penelope allowed him to guide her to the restaurant. The interior was dim and slightly cooler than the street. Blake pulled out a chair for her at a corner table, and she sat, grateful to be off her feet. He ordered coffee and sandwiches from a tired-looking woman who emerged from the kitchen. "I do not understand what alternative you could possibly propose," Penelope said once they were alone. "The contract was with your brother. He is deceased. Surely that ends the arrangement." Blake leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "The Bennett ranch needs a woman's presence. Thomas knew that, which is why he sent for a bride. With him gone, that need has not changed. I am proposing that you consider marrying me instead." Penelope stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I understand this is irregular," Blake continued, "but consider your position. You have traveled all this way. Do you have family in Boston, resources to start over?" "That is none of your concern. You are right, and I apologize for the presumption." Blake ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "Let me be plain. I am not asking you to make a decision today. Stay at the ranch for a few weeks. See what life here is like. If after that time you wish to return to Boston, I will personally pay for your passage and give you enough money to establish yourself there. But if you find that you could make a life here as my wife, then we could proceed with the marriage. A partnership, not captivity. I promise you that." The coffee arrived, and Penelope wrapped her hands around the warm cup, using the moment to think. She had $17 to her name, no family, and no prospects in Boston. Her father's creditors had seized everything. The alternative to this strange proposal was returning to Boston to seek work as a seamstress or shop girl, living in some cramped boarding house, struggling to survive. But marriage, the cage, the locked door. "Why would you want to marry a stranger?" she asked finally. Blake met her gaze steadily. "The same reason Thomas did, I suppose. The ranch is successful, but it is hard work and it is lonely. I have a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week, but the place needs a permanent presence, someone to build a life with. I watched my parents work side by side for 30 years before the fever took them. They were partners in every sense. That is what I want. And if I am not suited to ranch life, then you will have lost nothing but a few weeks of time, and you will leave with more resources than you arrived with." He paused. "I should tell you something else. I am not like Thomas was. My brother, may he rest in peace, had ideas about marriage that I do not share. He believed a wife should be obedient and silent, that a man's word was law in his home. I do not hold with that thinking." Penelope studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. She found only what appeared to be sincerity. "You said partnership, not captivity." "I meant it. A wife should be a partner, not a servant or possession, someone to share decisions with, to build something together. That is what I am offering." It was so close to what her mother had never had, what Penelope had always secretly dreamed of, that it frightened her. "I need time to think." "Of course. I have taken a room for you at the boarding house down the street. It is simple but clean. Rest tonight and I will call on you tomorrow morning. We can talk more then." Penelope nodded slowly. Blake paid for the meal she had barely touched and helped her carry her trunks to the boarding house. The proprietor, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Carson, showed her to a small room on the second floor with a window overlooking the main street. Alone at last, Penelope sank onto the narrow bed and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a dead man. Now his brother, a stranger with sky-blue eyes and promises of partnership, offered her a choice. Return to Boston with nothing, or stay and possibly step into the very cage she had always feared. She barely slept that night, tossing in the unfamiliar bed as her mind churned through possibilities. By the time pale light crept through her window, she had made a decision. She would accept Blake's offer of a trial period. A few weeks would give her time to assess the situation and gather the resources for a fresh start, whether here or back east. Blake arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, looking freshly scrubbed and nervous. "Have you considered my proposal?" "I will stay for a trial period," Penelope said, "but I want to be clear. I am making no promises about marriage. I will evaluate the situation honestly, and you must give me your word that if I choose to leave, you will not impede me." "You have my word." Blake extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Penelope shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from hard work. "When do we leave for the ranch?" "I have a wagon ready. I thought we could depart this afternoon, if that suits you. The ranch is about an hour's drive from town." Penelope spent the morning purchasing a few necessities from the general store. The proprietor, a chatty man named Mr. Hanson, seemed eager to gossip about the Bennetts. "Terrible thing about Thomas," he said as he wrapped her purchases. "Though I will say Blake is the better man of the two brothers. Thomas had a mean streak, especially when he had been drinking. Blake now, he is steady and fair. Treats folks right." This assessment aligned with Penelope's limited impression, but she reserved judgment. Men often presented one face to the public and another to their wives. The drive to the ranch gave Penelope her first real view of the Utah Territory landscape. Red rock formations rose in the distance, and the valley spread out in shades of gold and green, where irrigation brought life to the arid land. Blake handled the team of horses with easy competence, pointing out landmarks and neighboring properties as they traveled. "That is the Copper Creek, which runs through our land," he said, gesturing to a line of cottonwood trees. "The water rights were hard-won, but they make the ranch viable. We run about 200 head of cattle and have a good-sized vegetable garden. There is also a small orchard that my mother planted before she died." "How long ago did you lose your parents?" 4 years this past spring. Fever swept through the area. Thomas and I both fell ill too, but we recovered. Sometimes I think Thomas never quite got over losing them. He became harder after that, more withdrawn. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill. It was a substantial structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch and a shake shingle roof. Outbuildings dotted the property. A large barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Everything looked well-maintained but spare, functional rather than decorative. "It is not fancy," Blake said, seeming to read her thoughts, "but it is solid and paid for. My father built the main house himself, with Thomas and me helping when we were old enough to swing a hammer." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunks inside. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but as her eyes adjusted, Penelope took in the main room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with simple wooden furniture arranged around it. The kitchen occupied one end of the space, with a cast-iron stove and a hand pump at the sink. Everything was clean but austere, clearly a bachelor's residence. "Your room is upstairs," Blake said, leading the way. "There are 3 bedrooms. This was my parents' room, which I use now. That was Thomas's room, and this one was meant for guests or children." He opened the door to a pleasant room with whitewashed walls and a window facing the orchard. A simple bed frame held a mattress, and there was a dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair. It was sparse but infinitely better than the cramped boarding house room. "I will leave you to settle in," Blake said. "When you are ready, come down and I will show you around the property." Penelope unpacked her belongings, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the dresser. As she worked, she tried to imagine herself living here permanently, sharing this house with Blake Bennett as his wife. The thought sent a complicated flutter through her chest, part anxiety and part something she did not want to examine too closely. Blake proved to be an excellent guide and a surprisingly easy companion. He showed her the barn, where 4 horses nickered curiously at her approach. He introduced her to the dozen chickens and explained the ranch's daily routines. 2 hired men worked the property, he explained. They lived in the bunkhouse and took their meals there as well, coming to the main house only for specific business. "I want you to feel safe here," Blake said as they walked back toward the house. "You have a lock on your bedroom door. You are free to use any part of the property. If you need anything at all, you need only ask." "Why are you being so accommodating?" Penelope asked. "Most men in your position would simply demand obedience." Blake stopped walking and turned to face her. "My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She was educated and opinionated and absolutely certain of her own mind. My father loved that about her. He used to say that he wanted a wife who would challenge him, not a sheep who would just follow along. They made every important decision together, talked through everything. I saw what a real partnership looked like, and that is what I want for myself." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Penelope's chest. "Your brother did not share that view. Thomas took after our uncle, my father's brother. Very traditional ideas about a man's authority. He and my father argued about it constantly." Blake resumed walking. "I promised you partnership, not captivity. I meant that. If we marry, I want us to work together to respect each other's thoughts and feelings. I do not want a servant. I want an equal." That night, Penelope lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of the house settling. Blake had prepared a simple dinner of beef stew and biscuits, and they had eaten together at the kitchen table, making awkward but genuine conversation about their pasts. She had learned that Blake was 27, had never been married, and loved ranching despite its hardships. He read voraciously, favoring histories and adventure novels. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, making her laugh despite herself. In turn, she had shared carefully selected details of her life in Boston. Her mother's death, her father's decline, her abandoned dreams of teaching. She had not told him about her mother's warning about marriage, about the cage and the locked door. Some fears were too private to speak aloud. The trial period Blake had proposed stretched from days into weeks. Penelope settled into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. She took over the kitchen, discovering a talent for cooking she had never had opportunity to develop in Boston's cramped apartments. She tended the vegetable garden, finding unexpected peace in the work of coaxing life from the soil. She gathered eggs each morning and learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven. Blake was careful to maintain proper distance, never pressuring her or making inappropriate advances. Yet Penelope could not help but notice the way his eyes followed her sometimes, a warmth in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. She noticed other things too, the strength in his arms as he hefted hay bales, the kindness with which he treated the animals, the patience he showed when teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of flame and gold. Blake had been quiet all day, and Penelope sensed something weighing on his mind. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "You have been here nearly a month now. I know I said I would not pressure you, but I need to know what you are thinking. Do you see yourself staying? Is this a life you could imagine, Penelope took a slow breath, considering her answer. Honesty seemed the only fair response. I do not know. This is so different from everything I knew in Boston. The work is harder, the isolation more complete, yet I find I do not mind it as much as I expected. There is a freedom here I never had before. But, Blake prompted gently, but I am still afraid. I watched my mother's spirit break in marriage. I swore I would never let that happen to me. How can I be sure that what you offer is real and not just pretty words that will evaporate once vows are spoken? Blake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You cannot be sure. I could make 1,000 promises, but words are just air until they are backed by actions. I suppose the real question is whether you trust what you have seen these past weeks more than you fear what might happen. That is a hard question. I know. And I am not trying to push you into something you do not want. If you need more time, take it. If you decide this is not for you, I will honor my word and help you start fresh somewhere else. But Penelope, I want you to know something. He turned to face her, and in the fading light, his eyes were serious. These past weeks, having you here, working alongside you, talking with you in the evenings, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You are intelligent and capable and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I think we could build something good together, if you are willing to take that chance. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you face challenges head-on instead of shrinking from them. I know you are kind to the animals and respectful to the ranch hands. I know you have opinions about everything from politics to the best way to train horses, and you are not afraid to voice them. I know I look forward to seeing you each morning, and that the house feels empty when you are not in it. He paused. I am halfway in love with you already, if I am being honest. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Penelope's first instinct was to retreat, to protect herself. But something in Blake's expression stopped her. He was not demanding or presuming. He was simply offering the truth of his feelings, leaving her free to do with it what she would. I need more time, she said quietly. Then take it. I am not going anywhere. The next week brought a test neither of them anticipated. Penelope woke one morning to the sound of raised voices outside. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Blake in heated discussion with a well-dressed man on the porch. This is not up for negotiation, the stranger was saying. The railroad is coming through and they need this land. You will be well compensated. The railroad can route around my property, Blake replied, his voice hard. This land has been in my family for over 20 years. It is not for sale. You do not seem to understand the situation, Mr. Bennett. The railroad will come through one way or another. You can accept fair payment now, or you can fight it in court and lose everything. Penelope stepped onto the porch and both men turned to look at her. The stranger's gaze traveled over her with barely concealed assessment, making her skin crawl. "And who is this?" he asked. "My fiancé," Blake said without hesitation. "Penelope, this is Mr. Richard Hastings, representing the railroad interests." The lie, or perhaps not quite a lie, hung in the air. Penelope made a quick decision. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hastings. Though I must say, I find your business tactics rather aggressive." Hastings's smile did not reach his eyes. "Just being direct, madam. No point in dancing around the facts. The railroad is the future. Your fiancé would be wise to recognize that and take advantage of the opportunity." "The opportunity to lose our home," Penelope kept her voice level. "I hardly think that is advantageous. Surely the railroad has engineers capable of routing around existing properties. Many landowners along the proposed route have already been accommodated in this fashion." Hastings looked surprised that she knew this. "The route has been carefully surveyed. This is the most efficient path, or the most convenient, Blake interjected. My water rights are valuable, and I suspect that is the real interest here. But as I have said, this property is not for sale at any price. Hastings's expression hardened. You are making a mistake, Bennett. The railroad has ways of getting what it wants. Is that a threat? Blake's voice went dangerously quiet. It is a statement of fact. Hastings tipped his hat mockingly. Good day to you both. I suspect we will be speaking again soon. They watched him ride away, dust trailing behind his horse. Blake let out a long breath. I apologize for calling you my fiancé without asking permission. I thought it might make him back off. I am not upset. Though you should know, I do have some knowledge of railroad expansion. My father dealt with similar situations in Boston. Mr. Hastings is right that the railroad usually gets its way, but there are legal protections for established homesteads and water rights. Blake looked at her with renewed interest. You know about land law. My father used to discuss his business dealings at dinner. I paid attention. She paused. If you wish to fight this, you will need documentation of your claim, proof of continuous occupation, and a good lawyer. You may also want to band together with other landowners in the area. The railroad is less likely to bully a group than individuals. Those are excellent suggestions. Blake's expression held something close to wonder. Partnership, not captivity. See what I mean? Despite the seriousness of the situation, Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, someone valued her knowledge rather than dismissing it as unfeminine or inappropriate. The railroad threat became a catalyst. Over the following days, Blake and Penelope worked together to organize resistance among the local ranchers. They hosted meetings at the ranch, where Penelope surprised everyone by producing detailed maps and documentation strategies. Blake never once suggested she should leave the meetings to the men. Instead, he introduced her as his partner, making it clear her input was valued. The other ranchers were initially skeptical of taking advice from a woman, but Penelope's thorough knowledge and clear thinking won them over. By the end of the second meeting, even the most traditional among them were nodding along with her suggestions. One evening, after the other ranchers had departed, Blake and Penelope remained on the porch. The summer heat had finally broken, and a pleasant breeze carried the scent of sage and growing things. You were magnificent today, Blake said. Watching you explain the legal precedents to Jackson, who has been ranching for 30 years and thinks he knows everything, that was something to see. Penelope laughed. He was not pleased at first. No, but you won him over with logic and respect. That is a rare gift. Blake shifted in his chair to face her more fully. I have been thinking about something you said weeks ago about being afraid that marriage would be a cage. I want you to understand something. A cage is built to confine, to limit. What I am offering is not that. Think of it more like a partnership in a business, but the business is life itself. We each bring our strengths, shore up each other's weaknesses, and build something neither could achieve alone. That sounds wonderful in theory, Penelope said softly. But once we are married, you will have all the legal power. I would have no recourse if you changed your mind about this partnership notion. Blake was quiet for a moment. You are right. The law gives men power over their wives that can easily be abused. I cannot change the law, but I can make you a promise, backed by action. If you agree to marry me, we will go to a lawyer before the wedding. I will have papers drawn up that grant you equal claim to this ranch and half of any profits. I will also establish an account in your name alone, with enough money that you could leave and start over if you ever needed to. Would that help you feel safer? Penelope stared at him, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. You would do that? I would. The ranch should belong to both of us if we are building a life together, and you should never feel trapped. The partnership only works if both people choose it freely every day. He reached across the space between their chairs and gently took her hand. I love you, Penelope. I want to spend my life with you, working beside you, making decisions together, building something lasting. But I want you to choose this because you want it, not because you feel you have no other option. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. In that moment, sitting on the porch of her ranch house in Utah Territory, she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. This man, with his calloused hands and earnest eyes, was offering her everything she had been afraid to dream of. I love you too, she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day when you promised me partnership instead of captivity. I was just too scared to admit it. Blake stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. Does this mean you will marry me? Yes. Yes, I will marry you. The words came out in a rush, and then Blake was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. They married 3 weeks later, on a September morning when the air held the first hint of autumn cool. True to his word, Blake had taken Penelope to a lawyer in Salt Lake City, where legal documents were drawn up granting her equal ownership of the ranch and establishing a private account in her name. The lawyer had been shocked by the arrangement, warning Blake that it was highly irregular. My wife is my partner, Blake had said firmly. This is how we choose to structure our marriage. The wedding itself was simple, held in the small church in Monticello with the local ranchers and townspeople in attendance. Penelope wore a dress of blue silk that Blake had insisted on buying for her, and she carried wildflowers from the ranch's meadow. Mrs. Carson from the boarding house cried through the ceremony, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Blake kissed her gently, mindful of their audience. But his eyes held promises of deeper intimacy to come, and Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. The ranch community threw them a celebration at the town hall, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible for such a small population to produce. Penelope found herself swept into conversation after conversation, welcomed warmly by women who had previously regarded her with cautious curiosity. You are good for him, Mrs. Thompson, who ran the dress shop, told Penelope. Blake has always been a good man, but he has seemed lonely since his parents passed. Now he looks truly happy. As the evening wore on, Blake finally managed to steal Penelope away from the crowd. They climbed into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch, now their shared home in every sense. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear desert sky, and Penelope leaned against Blake's shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never imagined possible. Happy? Blake asked softly. Very, though I confess I am nervous about tonight. Blake's arm tightened around her. We will take things at whatever pace feels right to you. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives. Back at the ranch, Blake carried her over the threshold, making her laugh at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in the main room, which someone, probably Mrs. Carson, had decorated with wildflowers and candles. I have something for you, Blake said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold band. I know you are already wearing your wedding ring, but this was my mother's. My father gave it to her on their first anniversary. I would be honored if you would wear it. Penelope took the ring with trembling fingers. It was warm from Blake's pocket, engraved with tiny flowers. It is beautiful. Blake slipped it onto her finger next to her wedding band. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. I promise you, Penelope, every day for the rest of my life, this will be partnership, not captivity. Always. "Always," she echoed, and then his lips found hers. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Blake patient with her nervousness, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs, Penelope marveled at how wrong her mother's warnings had been. Marriage to Blake was not a cage. It was a door opening to possibilities she had never imagined. The following months brought both joys and challenges. The railroad fight intensified, with Hastings making several more appearances at the ranch, each time more threatening than the last. But the coalition of ranchers held firm, and their lawyer in Salt Lake City filed a series of challenges that slowed the railroad's advance. Penelope threw herself into this battle, corresponding with land rights advocates back east and researching legal precedents. She discovered a talent for organization and strategy that proved invaluable. Blake made sure everyone knew that his wife's contributions were essential to their success. "We could not do this without Penelope," he told the Ranchers Association at one meeting. "Her knowledge and planning have made the difference." The respect in his voice in front of all those men made Penelope's heart swell. This was partnership indeed. Winter came to Utah Territory with surprising force. Snow blanketed the ranch, and the work became harder, focused on keeping the cattle fed and the buildings maintained. But the hardship brought Blake and Penelope closer together. They worked side by side, fell into bed exhausted each night, and woke to face each new challenge as a team. On Christmas morning, Penelope woke to find Blake already up, stoking the fire against the cold. She wrapped a quilt around herself and padded downstairs. "Merry Christmas," Blake said, pulling her into his arms. "I have something for you." He led her to the main room, where a beautiful writing desk sat near the window. It was made of rich walnut, with multiple drawers and a leather writing surface. "I know you have been doing all your correspondence at the kitchen table," Blake said. "I thought you deserved a proper place to work. I built it myself in the barn when I was supposed to be doing other things." Penelope ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears blurring her vision. "It is perfect. I love it. There is more." Blake pulled out the center drawer to reveal stacks of fine writing paper, ink bottles, and a set of steel-nibbed pens. "For my brilliant wife, who is going to save all of our ranches." "I have something for you too," Penelope said. She retrieved a package from its hiding place and handed it to him. Blake unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal and a beautiful pocket watch. Inside the watch, she had arranged for an engraving, "To my partner, my love always, P." "This is too much," Blake said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "No, it is not nearly enough." Penelope wrapped her arms around his waist. "You gave me everything, Blake. Freedom and partnership and love. A watch and a journal are small things in comparison." They spent a quiet Christmas together, just the two of them, trading stories of past holidays and making plans for future ones. As evening fell and they sat before the fire, Blake pulled Penelope onto his lap. "I have been thinking," he said. "This fight with the railroad could take years. Maybe we should consider what we want beyond that, what we want to build together." "What did you have in mind?" "Children eventually, if you want them. Expansion of the ranch. Maybe a school for the area so families do not have to send their children all the way to Salt Lake City for education. You would make an excellent teacher." Penelope's breath caught. "You would support me teaching, of course." "Why wouldn't I? You have the knowledge and the passion for it. We could build a small schoolhouse on our land, open it to all the families in the area. You could teach, and I would help however needed." He kissed her temple. "Partners, remember, we build what we want together." The idea took root in Penelope's mind and grew throughout the winter. By spring, she and Blake had drawn up plans for a one-room schoolhouse and had gotten commitments from 6 families to send their children. The Ranchers Association, grateful for Penelope's help with the railroad issue, voted to contribute both labor and materials. The schoolhouse rose quickly that summer, a neat structure with large windows and a stone chimney. Penelope threw herself into preparation, ordering books and supplies, creating lesson plans, getting to know the children who would be her students. Blake built her desks and a large chalkboard, working in the evenings after his ranch duties were done. In July, the railroad fight finally came to a resolution. The territorial court ruled in favor of the ranchers, forcing the railroad to reroute around their properties. Hastings appeared one last time, his face tight with anger, to inform them of the decision. "You have won this round," he said to Blake and Penelope, "but the railroad never forgets." "Neither do we," Penelope replied calmly. "Good day, Mr. Hastings." After he left, the ranchers threw a massive celebration. Penelope found herself hoisted onto shoulders and paraded around like a hero, which mortified and delighted her in equal measure. Blake watched with undisguised pride, and when she finally escaped the crowd to his side, he kissed her soundly in front of everyone. "My brilliant, beautiful wife," he said. "We did it." "We did it together," she corrected. "Partnership, remember." The school opened in September with 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Penelope loved teaching, loved watching young minds grasp new concepts. Blake would sometimes ride over during the day, ostensibly to check on the building but really just to watch her work. The tenderness in his eyes as he observed her with the children made Penelope's heart ache with love. One evening in late October, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, not wanting to raise false hopes, but the signs were unmistakable. She was pregnant. She told Blake that night in their bed, whispering the news against his chest. He went very still, then pulled back to look at her face. "Truly," his voice was full of wonder, "truly, we are going to have a baby." Blake's whoop of joy probably woke every creature for a mile around. He peppered her face with kisses, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "When?" "Late May or early June, I think." "A spring baby. That is perfect." His expression turned serious. "How do you feel about this? I know we talked about children, but talking and actually expecting are different things." Penelope considered the question carefully. A year ago, the thought of pregnancy would have terrified her, would have seemed like the ultimate lock clicking shut on her cage. But now, with Blake, everything was different. "I am happy," she said honestly. "A little scared, perhaps, but mostly happy. We are going to be parents, Blake." "The best parents," he promised. "This child will grow up knowing that partnerships, not captivity, is what marriage should be. That love means freedom, not control." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Penelope continued teaching through the winter, though she had to let her dresses out progressively as her belly swelled. The ranch women rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Blake treated her like precious glass, which alternately amused and frustrated her. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know. But allow me to spoil you a bit. I am excited about this baby." Penelope retired from teaching in April, turning the school over to a young man from Salt Lake City who had recently earned his teaching certificate. She spent her final weeks of pregnancy nesting, preparing the nursery in what had been the guest room, and trying not to let nerves overwhelm her. On a warm evening in early June, her labor began. Mrs. Carson and Mrs. Thompson attended her, experienced women who had helped birth dozens of babies. Blake stayed nearby, pacing the hallway, coming in whenever Penelope called for him. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Penelope thought she could not go on, when the pain seemed unbearable. But Blake held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, whispered encouragement. "You are the strongest person I know," he told her. "You can do this. We are almost there." Finally, as afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom window, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "Mrs." Carson cleaned him up and laid him on Penelope's chest, a tiny red-faced miracle with a shock of dark hair. "A boy," Blake said, his voice choked with emotion. He gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and impossibly small fingers closed around his much larger one. "He is perfect." They named him Benjamin, after Blake's father. Little Benjamin proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong. Watching Blake with their son, Penelope fell in love with her husband all over again. He was a devoted father, changing nappies without complaint, walking the floor with Benjamin when he fussed, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed. "Partnership," Blake reminded her one night when she protested that she could handle the 3 in the morning feeding herself. "We are in this together." As Benjamin grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. The cattle herd increased, the orchard produced abundant fruit, and the vegetable garden sprawled over an ever larger patch of land. Penelope returned to teaching part-time, bringing Benjamin with her to the schoolhouse, where he napped in a cradle while she instructed the older children. When Benjamin was 2, Penelope became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier. Their daughter, Grace, arrived on a snowy December morning, smaller than her brother had been but equally perfect. Blake cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the reality of a daughter. "I promise you," he whispered to the tiny bundle, "I will raise you to know your worth, to understand that you can be anything you want to be. You will never be told that marriage is a cage. You will see what a real partnership looks like." Penelope watched this moment, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She thought of her mother, bitter and broken. She thought of her own fears, the conviction that marriage meant the death of dreams, and she marveled at how wrong those fears had been. Marriage to Blake had not closed doors. It had opened them. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new joys and challenges. They added to their family, 2 more children over the next several years, another son, William, and finally a daughter they named Rose. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Blake and hired carpenters adding on rooms and a second story. The school flourished, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Penelope taught regularly, and Blake often came to give demonstrations on practical skills like animal husbandry and land management. Their children attended alongside the children of neighboring ranches, learning reading and mathematics, but also the value of community and cooperation. True to his word, Blake never made a major decision without consulting Penelope. When opportunities arose to expand the ranch, they discussed them together. When neighboring families needed help, they decided together how much they could offer. When their children faced difficulties, they presented a united front, supporting each other's parenting decisions. The wider world was changing too. Utah became a state in 1896, bringing new laws and opportunities. The railroad that had tried to steal their land now connected the territory to markets across the country, allowing the ranch to prosper in ways Blake's father could never have imagined. Towns grew larger, new families arrived, and the wild frontier began to feel a bit less wild. Through it all, Blake and Penelope's partnership remained the foundation of everything they built. They still worked side by side, still made decisions together, still ended each day talking on the porch about plans and dreams and the mundane details of life. On their 20th wedding anniversary, In September of 1898, Blake surprised Penelope with a trip to Salt Lake City, leaving the children in the capable hands of Mrs. Carson. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and walked through the city like young sweethearts. On their last evening, sitting in a restaurant finer than any Penelope had seen since leaving Boston, Blake took her hand across the table. "You remember what I told you that first day?" he asked. "That I wanted partnership, not captivity?" "I remember everything about that day," Penelope said. "I was so scared, so certain that marriage would be a prison." And now, Penelope looked at her husband, at the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling. She thought of their children, healthy and happy. She thought of the ranch, the school, the life they had built together through 20 years of hard work and unwavering partnership. "Now I know that marriage can be the greatest freedom," she said, "when it is built on respect and love and true partnership. When both people choose each other every day, not because they are trapped, but because they want to be together. You taught me that, Blake. You showed me what love really means." Blake raised her hand to his lips. "You taught me things too. You made me better than I was. Stronger, wiser, more complete. These 20 years with you have been the greatest adventure of my life." "Only 20, Penelope teased. "We are just getting started." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready for whatever the future held. The children greeted them with exuberant enthusiasm, full of stories about their week. The ranch hands had kept everything running smoothly. Life resumed its familiar, beloved rhythms. The years continued to pass. Benjamin grew into a thoughtful young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Grace proved to have her mother's aptitude for teaching and her father's head for business. William wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animal health. Young Rose, the baby, showed talent for art, always drawing the landscape and animals around her. Blake and Penelope made sure each child knew they were free to pursue their own dreams. They established college funds, encouraged education, and never suggested that any path was closed because of gender or convention. Their daughters would have the same opportunities as their sons. This was the legacy they wanted to leave. As Penelope approached her 50th birthday in 1906, she sometimes found herself marveling at the journey her life had taken. The frightened young woman who had arrived in Monticello all those years ago seemed like a different person. That woman had expected prison. Instead, she had found freedom in the most unexpected place. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their grandchildren playing in the yard, Benjamin having recently married and started his own family, Blake pulled Penelope close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how wrong I was all those years ago. About how marriage to the right person is not a cage at all." "It is a door," Blake said, continuing the metaphor. "A door that we walk through together, choosing each day to stay on the same path." "A door that opens to more doors," Penelope added. "More possibilities, more adventures, more love than I ever imagined possible." "Partnership, not captivity," Blake said, the words that had defined their marriage from the beginning. "Always," Penelope agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. The years that followed brought the changes that time always brings. Children grew and scattered, though not far, each establishing their own lives while remaining close to the family ranch. Grandchildren multiplied, bringing noise and joy to the house that had once seemed too quiet. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined management of Blake, Penelope, and their son Benjamin, who proved as committed to partnership with his own wife as his father had been. Blake and Penelope grew older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of youth evolved into something even richer. A profound companionship, an understanding that needed no words, a partnership that had been tested by time and emerged stronger. On a spring morning in 1924, a few months after their 46th wedding anniversary, Blake and Penelope stood together in the orchard. The trees his mother had planted so long ago were still producing fruit, gnarled and ancient but vital. Blake was 73 now, Penelope 68, both still active though moving more slowly than in their youth. "Remember when you first saw this place?" Blake asked, his arm around Penelope's waist. "What did you think?" "I thought it looked barren and harsh," Penelope admitted. "I could not imagine calling it home." And now, Penelope looked around at the land they had worked together for more than 4 decades. The ranch was thriving, the newest generation already learning to ride and help with chores. The school she had founded was being run by her daughter Grace, who had returned after her own education to take over the teaching. The house was full of love and laughter, exactly as Blake's parents had once filled it. "Now it is the only home I can imagine," she said. "This is where my life truly began, where I learned what love and partnership really mean, where I stopped being afraid and started truly living." Blake kissed her temple, a gesture as familiar as breathing after all these years. "I am grateful every day that you took a chance on me. That you stayed, even though you were scared. That you built this life with me. I am grateful you taught me that marriage could be freedom instead of captivity, that you kept your promises every single day for 46 years. And I will keep them until my last breath," Blake promised. "Partnership, not captivity." "Always," Penelope agreed, the word a vow renewed. They stood together in the morning sun, two people who had chosen each other across the years, who had built something lasting from an arrangement that had seemed hopeless at the start. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Children's laughter, cattle lowing, the whisper of wind through new leaves. Penelope thought of her mother's warning. "Marriage is a cage, my darling. Once you enter, the door locks behind you." How wrong those words had been. Marriage to Blake had been a door, yes, but one that remained always open. A door they had walked through together, hand in hand, choosing each day to stay. Not because they were trapped, but because they were free to choose and they chose each other. That choice, renewed daily across decades, had made all the difference. Years later, when Blake passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, Penelope held his hand and whispered one last time, "Partnership, not captivity, always, my love." She followed him 3 years later, at 79, having lived a life rich with love, purpose, and the kind of freedom that comes only from choosing the right partner. Their children and grandchildren gathered for her funeral, and each told stories of a woman who had been ahead of her time, who had shown them all what true partnership looked like. On her headstone, placed next to Blake's in the small cemetery outside Monticello, their children had the same inscription carved, "Partnership, not captivity, always." It was the perfect summation of a life well lived, a love well chosen, and a marriage that had defied every expectation to become something beautiful. The Bennett Ranch continued for generations, each new generation learning the lessons Blake and Penelope had taught. That marriage should be a partnership of equals, that love means freedom, and that the strongest bonds are those chosen freely, every day, forever. And in the house where Penelope had once feared she would be imprisoned, love continued to flourish, a legacy of partnership and mutual respect that would echo through time, showing that when two people truly commit to walking through life as equals, they can build something that lasts not just for a lifetime, but for generations. The end.